Hello. Yes, it's been a while and time does fly, doesn't it? Okay, well, today we're going to have a look at a very interesting book. It is a book that I believe very few people actually have read in comparison to other books on the market. It is The Connection of Tarot and Astrology by Muriel Bruce Hasbrouck. She was a classical pianist and a journalist, and she then connected the tarot and astrology with rediscovering and enhancing a 10-day cycle formula. Now, she came up with a mathematical relationship, actually, which reveals a person's fundamental natural response to the basic challenges of life. And this, in turn, helped people to lead to the understanding of themselves and other people around them, mainly the true personalities and the characters. And with this information, you better understand and know yourself, really, at a deeper level than traditional tarot or astrological methods alone. So with this information she lays out in the book, you're better able to overcome your weaknesses as well as maximize your strength to truly succeed in life. You'll be better able to map out a course of action. You'll know why you're failing in certain areas and what to focus in. It's very interesting. So if we go back, the Hasbroucks were actual geniuses in a different area. The Hasbroucks, Muriel and Lewis, were actually amazing geniuses, I will call them, of market forecasting. They created and rediscovered a system based on a correlation with natural forces, which was coined by some as being called cosmoeconomics. This was the forecasting of the performance of economies. Now, the only other comparable level of research in this area and insight in this field will be the work of W.D. Gann, who actually preceded them, and whose legacy provides the core inspiration for most esoteric, cosmological, or astro-based research. Well, the Hasbroucks, although they remain virtually unknown, their work by far surpassed Gann's. And then around 1941, Muriel published the book Tarot and Astrology, The Pursuit of Destiny, which is extremely interesting. It really is. It's a book that you must pick up if you haven't already and actually study it. It is a small book, but it is loaded with insights and a system, the 10-day cycle formula, which I have not seen anywhere else. And this book was actually reprinted right up until the 1980s. It had a fair amount of popularity then, but it's dropped off since then. And in comparison, like I said, other tarot books really took off and have become massively popular. Yet I believe this one is probably the best out of the lot. So if we have a look at the Hasbroucks, we'll look at Lewis Hasbrouck, which was Muriel's husband. He was born on May 19th, 1890, and he died on June the 8th, 1979. He was actually, if we have a look, a graduate of Yale and served in both world wars and was the captain in the U.S. Army Air Force at the time. He worked in Wall Street during the span of the Great Crash and found that conventional sources of wisdom neither predicted nor answered the trying questions of the time. So by seeking new data and a method of forecasting that would be more true to life, he gave the economic input to the space-time dynamics and geophysics of his spouse, Muriel Bruce. And he actually wrote an article called Mass Psychology in a Unified Field Theory, Trend Analysis and New Approach. If you can find that, it's an interesting read. Now, Muriel Bruce was actually born in Canada on July 20th, 1890 and died on November 27th, 1981 at the ripe old age of 91. She was a music and English major in college, a classical pianist, and a reporter for a Toronto newspaper. She published several books, novels, and sonnets, chief among them her 1941 work, which I just mentioned before, which is the theme of today's video, which is called Tarot and Astrology, The Pursuit of Destiny, which is still in print today, although actually, to be honest, it is becoming very hard to find. Few copies left, actually. Let's see, when I bought this was a couple of years ago. It was a little bit difficult to find, but it was still on the market. I think if you go on Amazon, you'll still be able to find at least the used copies, although the price is going up, so be quick. Okay, so she and Lewis were married on December 19th, 1931, and together their research developed into what they called space-time forecasting. Now, it is Muriel's story that is the most intriguing. In fact, it was Muriel's genius and insight that led to the important discoveries and applications that became space-time forecasting. So it seems that early in Muriel's life, she developed close connections with some key figures in the Theosophical movement and the Golden Dawn magical order, which is very interesting, which would influence and redirect her focus in life. These figures were none other than Dr. Israel Regardie, the famous biographer of the Golden Dawn and of Aleister Crowley, with whom she maintained a friendship and correspondence until the 1970s, that is with Dr. Israel Regardie. It also seems that early in her career she worked as a ghostwriter for Evangeline Adams, who was a famous astrologer of J.P. Morgan, who is rumored to have said, "Millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do." Okay? Isn't that interesting? Anyway, sometime around the 1920s, she developed close friendships also with two other extremely great figures of the 20th century, Walter Russell and none other than Paul Foster Case. Walter Russell was well known for his cosmological masterpiece, The Universal One, which is a key work in the study of the cosmological theory behind Gan, and said by some to be one of the figures referred to in Gan's famous work, The Tunnel Through the Air. So Walter Russell was a visionary mystic scientist who developed an energetic vortex lattice theory and discovered some atomic elements years before the scientific community found them through his 10-octave wave theory. Now, Muriel was one of the first to read Russell's draft of his magnum opus, which is shown by her possession of the original onion skin carbon copy of the introduction and the first chapter of the treatise, complete with Russell's hand-drawn images, while it was still named The Eternal One. Years later, in 1931, she wrote the introductory article to his exhibition of paintings called The Invisible Universe at the Museum of Science and Industry in New York. She actually studied with Russell for 7 years and is the only known market researcher to have worked with him personally. This is all very interesting. Around 1929, she met and became a student and research partner of Paul Foster Case, who was the author of The True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order, numerous books on tarot, and the founder of the highly respectable mystery school, the Builders of the Adytum, which is still in existence to this day. Paul Case is most famous for his penetrating study of the tarot and its use in the developmental and practical systems of esoterics, with a strong Kabbalistic, mathematical, astrological orientation, leading some Gan students to pursue this course of training to better understand Gan and his work. Collections of his Bota course series, which take a decade to obtain and work through, have been known to sell for as much as $5,000 for a complete set, maybe more there. It was Case who directed Muriel's study towards the tarot as a universal system in which can be found coded secrets to universal knowledge. While Case directed his tarot work towards the development of his mystery school, Muriel decided she would see if there was a way to integrate tarot and astrology to discover a scientific methodology which would bring astrology out of their realm of esoterics and onto an equal footing with modern science. This was her aim and what she actually managed to accomplish. with this book. So with her discovery of a secret book on the tarot called Book T, well, it's not that secret to members of the Golden Dawn even now, because it formed the basis for the tarot work in the Golden Dawn magical group. Anyway, by coming across this, because at the time things weren't really published, and Regedy was the first one to actually leak things, along with Aleister Crowley, who leaked a lot of work, but a lot of the internal aspects of it and secrets remained unpublished, and the group actually continued. People thought it was lost and folded, but it continued in New Zealand under the name of the Smaragdum Thalassus, or better known as the Wharera, or Wharera, depending on who pronounces it, in New Zealand, which continued until 1980, I believe, and still has a descendant temple in operation to this day, which is remaining secret. Anyway, let's get back to this. So, anyway, through this book T, she cracked the veil code, which led to her discovery of space-time field forces, the key missing element in most astrological research. Now, the discovery of space-time dynamics. The nature of this key element is something that has been long sought by all astrologers, and is even today the missing piece leading numerous researchers to attempt to reconstruct the ancient systems of astrology. It is an overriding element which creates a kind of background or intermediary energy which determines when lesser influences become active or not. Many astrologers discover some planetary relationships in the markets, only to see that after a sequence of occurrences, the influence disappears or changes. This is one of the biggest problems leading to the inconsistency of much astrological analysis. Now, Muriel Hasbrouck's discovery of space-time field forces, or space-time dynamics, solves this overriding background energy problem by providing a different methodology to interpret astronomical mechanics through a type of Einsteinian field theory. More importantly, by the addition of these field forces, it is able to produce a system of celestial mechanics which is fully predictable and mechanical to such a degree that it takes these calculations out of the esoteric realm of astrological interpretation into the scientific field of electromagnetic and solar force mechanics. All right, I hope I haven't lost you there. It is a mouthful, but this book is quite amazing, actually. So from the time Muriel made this discovery, she abhorred the term astrology and did everything to distance her theories from those of her esoteric tradition. To her, space-time field forces provided a clear demonstration of the energetic dynamics of force interaction within the solar system, and provided a scientifically verifiable mechanics of the propagation of celestial influence through the medium of the sun. Her theory perfectly aligned with the newly accepted relativity physics of Albert Einstein, and she felt her discovery would provide a valued scientific contribution to humanity. All right, so the first application of her system was to the prediction of earthquakes. This is what she started to do: volcanic activity and space weather. It was Lewis's input, after having watched his and his clients' investments disappear in the great crash of 1929, that inspired the investigation of financial market influence as well, though that was not to be the initial focus of their endeavors. By the mid-50s, Muriel had developed and tested her system for many years, with the result that she was able to forecast earthquakes and space weather with an approximate 90% accuracy rate. That is phenomenal. So this era, being the dawn of the space age, Muriel's desire was to contribute to the emergent solar and space science by providing practical solutions to unresolved difficulties faced by the scientific community. The prediction of earthquakes was an obvious contribution which would benefit humanity, and indeed to this day the scientific community has not developed the predictive ability that the Hasbroucks possessed in the 1950s. So Muriel wrote some articles trying to develop interest in that field. However, it was the forecasting of space weather that became the primary direction the Hasbroucks took in order to attempt to bring their theories to use of the modern world. Muriel had her theory evaluated and found accurate by a scientist at Bell Laboratories and monitored by, I think his name, let's have a look here. Whoops, the name was, if I can find it, H.T. Stetson. Yes, by H.T. Stetson. All right, so anyway, he was a professor of MIT, I believe, and author of 2 books on sunspots used by Baumring in his curriculum. They were also well acquainted with John Nelson, who had developed a similar theory of planetary radio disturbance for RCA, though their system was far more reaching and advanced than his. They formed a company called Geomagnetic Research Incorporated and began to contact government agencies dealing with space launches, as well as the High Altitude Observatory, which produced the ongoing space weather reports for the US government, which Muriel had used for years to track her solar disturbance forecast results. She realized that with the incredible cost of rockets and missiles that were being developed by the government and the losses they regularly incurred as a result of bad space weather, that her predictive technique would be invaluable in saving the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars lost each year to crashes and failures. So, for 6 years, they contacted various branches of government, always receiving some initial interest, with the High Altitude Observatory even closely evaluating their work for a period of time. But in the end, the scientists and physicists just could not swallow that there was a way, using just astronomical data, not empirical measuring tools like satellites and solar data, for some tabular calculation to predict space weather. Even though they followed and confirmed the predictions themselves, they found that Muriel's work was highly accurate. They just couldn't accept how she arrived at her accurate conclusions. Their minds were shut and seemingly impenetrable to alternative input. Now, isn't this the case usually, even to this day? So with frustration and a farewell sonnet, the Hasbroucks shut down geomagnetic research and decided instead to focus their attention on forecasting economic trends, knowing that such proven accuracy would be of great interest in practical world like Wall Street in the financial community. So on October the 15th, 1964, the Hasbroucks officially kicked off their new financial forecasting report, Space-Time Forecasting of Economic Trends. In 1957, they had published a 7-year forecast in the magazine American Mercury, which had been quite accurate. And with this forecast record under their belt and their interest in a government partnership finished, they felt confident that the market was the direction they were intended to go. Okay, so anyway, Hasbrouck eventually left her work to Harriet Higginson after many years. She was becoming very old. And Harriet added her techniques to Muriel's work. With Harriet's passing, the Hasbrouck secrets eventually disappeared. And around 1974, they started re-emerging again into the 80s and 90s. And not until the 2000s were they rediscovered. So they basically all but disappeared. But it's quite amazing because they were uncannily accurate with their forecasting. Now, getting back to the book Tarot and Astrology, if you really want to better understand yourself and your purpose and your weaknesses and strengths, and then how to map out how to better tackle life to achieve success, you really have to get this book. Once again, it's called Tarot and Astrology, The Pursuit of Destiny. It's a small book. How many pages is it? I have it here. It's around, 224 pages in length. Very well worth studying. Okay, so get yourself a friction highlighter, so if you make mistakes you can easily erase it, and just highlight the crap out of this book because you're going to be using it to do most of your forecasting work for yourself and research. It's really brilliant. So go ahead and pick up a copy if you can today. Now, I will end today's video on that note. An announcement I've just opened a day or so ago. The Teespring shop selling wonderful and what I consider to be wonderful. I know it doesn't sound humble, but these are magical designs. They look really cool on you. Check out the shop and order one for yourself or for a friend as a present. All the proceeds go actually to the Japan Cancer Research Fund for Kids, which I have been heavily involved with now for 2.5 years. So all the money will go into that. These shirts don't cost that much. They cost on average the same as anything else. The designs are talismanic. They're magical. And if you do like one, which I hope you do, just please order, okay? All right, that's all for me today. Check out the link, the Teespring link in the, description. Have a great week ahead, great weekend, great Independence Day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.